She wasn't good enough to marry. That's what Preston Calloway said. Not to Amara's face, but to the men who mattered most in his world, laughing over whiskey while she stood outside the door holding the dinner she had cooked for him. 3 years. She had given that man 3 years of her life, her silence, her patience, her belief that love was something you earned through loyalty. And he reduced all of it to one word: comfortable. Not wife material, not worthy, just comfortable. The kind of woman you kept around until something better came along. If someone did that to you, what would you do? Amara put the food down on the floor outside his door, walked back inside, took off her ring, set it on the table without a word, and left. But the story doesn't end there, because the man who called her temporary had no idea that the most dangerous person in Busan had already noticed her. And unlike Preston, Kang Min-jae didn't see a woman who wasn't enough. He saw the woman everyone else was too blind to recognize. If this kind of story speaks to you, real, raw, and utterly unforgiving, subscribe to this channel right now and follow this story all the way to the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling us the city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Don't go anywhere. You'll want to be here for every single part. The night Amara Bennett's life split in two started the way most disasters do. Quietly, without warning, looking exactly like an ordinary evening. She had taken the subway from her studio apartment near Gwangali Beach, carrying a cloth bag with 2 containers of food she had spent the better part of the afternoon preparing. Preston liked the braised short ribs from the restaurant near her old neighborhood in Atlanta, and she had spent years perfecting her own version, the kind of dish that took patience, low heat, time. The kind of thing you only made for someone you believed in. She was 31 years old, had been living in Busan for 4 years, and for 3 of those years she had organized her entire existence around a man who wore his ambition like a second skin. Preston Calloway was the kind of good-looking that made rooms rearrange themselves around him. Tall, well-dressed, always with the right word at the right moment. He had found Amara at a gallery opening 2 weeks after she arrived in Korea, charmed her with the kind of attention that felt like being held up to a light, and somewhere between his promises and her loneliness, she had let herself believe he meant every word. She was a designer. She had come to Korea with real ambitions, a portfolio, a business plan, sketches for her own studio. She had studied interior design at Howard University, worked 2 years in New York, and had applied for a fellowship position with a Seoul-based cultural foundation that had been doing genuinely interesting work with traditional Korean aesthetics and modern space design. She wasn't chasing Preston. She had been chasing something entirely her own. But love, or what she had let herself call love, had a way of making a woman rearrange her priorities without quite noticing it was happening. Preston had suggested, gently at first, that his social world required a certain kind of discretion, that certain clients might feel uncomfortable if his personal life seemed too visible, too complicated. He'd used the word optics a lot. He'd said it was temporary, just until his position was more secure. So Amara had scaled back her business contacts. She had declined the fellowship extension. She had turned down 2 referrals from a designer she admired in Seoul because Preston had mentioned offhandedly that one of the referrals was connected to a man he had business tensions with. She had shrunk herself in 100 small ways that each seemed reasonable in the moment. Standing in the elevator of his building that night, she told herself things were different now. Preston had mentioned the future more in the last month. He had introduced her to 2 colleagues at a dinner without the careful half-step distance he sometimes kept. She thought, she had genuinely let herself think, that the hard part was behind them. The elevator opened on the 32nd floor. Preston's penthouse occupied the entire level. She could hear voices before she reached the door. Male voices, loud in the way men got when they were comfortable and well-fed and several drinks deep. She recognized the particular cadence of Preston in performance mode, the slight sharpening of his accent that happened when he was working an audience. She didn't knock immediately. She shifted the bag in her arms and was about to reach for the door when she heard her name. Not spoken warmly. Not spoken the way someone mentions a person they care about. Spoken like a category. Amara's different, sure. Look, she's a good woman. Preston's voice was unhurried, amused in that easy way she had once found attractive. But you're asking me about marriage, Seok-hyun. Come on, that's not... she doesn't have the connections. She doesn't come from money. My family's been in these circles for 3 generations, and she makes it work. She's comfortable. She's comfortable to come home too." Someone laughed. Then another voice, older, said something in Korean she couldn't fully follow, and Preston laughed too. "Exactly," he said. "Exactly." Amara stood in the hallway. She was aware of her own breathing, aware of the weight of the bag, aware that the temperature in the corridor hadn't changed, but something had gone cold anyway, somewhere in her chest, spreading outward slowly like water through a crack. Comfortable. She replayed the word. Let it sit in her mouth the way you test a food you're not sure is still good. She waited for it to mean something different, for some alternate reading, some context she had missed, some version where it wasn't exactly what it sounded like. It was exactly what it sounded like. She stood there for what might have been 30 seconds or 3 minutes. The voices continued inside. Preston said something about a contract. Someone mentioned a golf game. The world kept moving with the complete indifference of a world that had no idea what was falling apart in a hallway on the 32nd floor. Amara set the bag down on the floor outside the door. She didn't slam it. She didn't drop it. She placed it down carefully, like she was putting something to rest. Then she straightened up, smoothed her coat, and walked back to the elevator. She didn't cry in the elevator. She had this specific ability. She'd had it since she was a child, growing up in a house where emotions were considered a kind of inconvenience, to hold herself completely together until she was somewhere private. The elevator descended. She stood with her back straight and her face still, and her hands loosely at her sides, and she did not let herself fall apart. She took the subway home. She sat in her apartment for an hour and a half, and then she called Madison. Madison Carter picked up on the second ring with the particular alertness of a person who reads silence as well. They had met in Amara's first year in Busan. Madison was a financial analyst from Chicago who had relocated for work and had that loud, specific laugh that cut through rooms and the kind of directness that some people found abrasive and Amara found like water in a desert. "Talk," Madison said, instead of hello. "He said I'm comfortable," Amara said. "He said I don't have the connections, that I'm not the kind of woman he marries." A silence. "Did he say it to you?" "To his friends. I was standing outside the door." Another silence, different in texture. "Okay," Madison said carefully. "Okay. What did you do?" "I left the food outside his door and came home." "You... what?" Madison's voice shifted into something sharp. "Amara, where's your ring?" Amara looked at her left hand. She had taken the ring off in the elevator and put it in her coat pocket. She reached in now and pulled it out. A modest oval diamond Preston had given her 8 months ago, with a speech about their future that she had believed completely. "I have it," she said. "What are you going to do with it?" She looked at it for a long moment. It caught the light from the lamp on her side table. It was a beautiful ring. She had thought so every time she'd looked at it. "I'm going to give it back," she said. She didn't scream. She didn't smash anything. She went to bed, woke at 5 in the morning, showered and dressed as if she were going somewhere important, and took the subway back to Preston's building. The morning doorman recognized her and let her up without a call. Preston opened the door in a dress shirt and slacks, clearly already preparing for his day. His expression when he saw her went through 3 phases in less than 2 seconds. Surprise, then something carefully arranged into concern, then the particular smile that she now recognized as performance. "Hey, I tried calling you last night. I was worried." She held out the ring. He looked at it, then at her. Then something shifted in his face. Not guilt exactly, but the particular recalibration of a man reassessing a situation that wasn't going according to plan. "Amara." "I heard you," she said. Her voice was entirely level. "Through the door, last night." He said nothing. "I'm not angry," she said, which was mostly true. "I'm not here to fight. I'm returning your ring, and I'm letting you know that we're done." "You don't have the full context." "Preston." She said his name quietly, the way you say stop. "Don't." He looked at the ring again. He didn't take it. She set it on the small table inside the entryway, the one with the jade vase he'd bought in Incheon, and stepped back. "You spent 3 years making me smaller," she said. "Not all at once, piece by piece. You never once did it loudly, so I kept thinking I was choosing it myself. I'm done choosing it." She turned and walked to the elevator. He called her name once from the doorway. She pressed the lobby button and watched the doors close. She stood in the elevator and breathed. This time, there was no held-together stillness. She felt something cracking open. Not grief, or not only grief. Something else, underneath it. Something that had been compressed for a long time and was now very slowly beginning to expand back into its original shape. She didn't know what to do with that feeling yet, but she recognized it. The weeks after were not cinematic. She did not immediately transform into a confident, thriving version of herself. She did not wake up the next morning with clarity and purpose. She was 31 years old, her engagement was over, her design career had been quietly sidelined for 2 years, and she lived in a studio apartment in Busan, where the hot water heater made a knocking sound every time she showered. She went through her contacts and sent 8 emails to former clients and professional connections, reintroducing herself and letting them know she was available again. 3 of the 8 replied. One was polite but vague. One offered a very small project, redecorating a break room for a mid-sized shipping company that paid less than her rent. The third was Madison, who had technically been CC'd by accident but responded with a string of encouragement and a dinner invitation. She took the break room project. She went to the dinner. She spent a lot of time walking along the waterfront near her apartment, not because it was therapeutic in any obvious way, but because walking gave her something to do with her body while her mind worked through the architecture of 3 years' worth of decisions she had thought were choices but were actually concessions. Preston did not call again after the morning she returned the ring. This was, she recognized, entirely in character. Preston managed exits the way he managed everything, with calculation and minimal mess. She suspected he had already moved on to whatever came next for him. She told herself this didn't hurt. It hurt. Madison called twice a week and showed up in person at least once, usually with food and the specific kind of company that didn't require Amara to perform okayness. They watched television. They argued about movies. Madison told terrible jokes that Amara laughed at against her will. It wasn't healing exactly, but it was something adjacent to it. About 6 weeks after the breakup, Madison came over with takeout and an expression Amara recognized as premeditated. "There's a charity exhibition," Madison said, before she had even sat down. "At the Park Hyatt, next Saturday. Art and cultural philanthropy thing, organized by the Jang Family Foundation. It's a good room." "No. You haven't heard what I'm going to say. You're going to say it'll be good for me to get out and be around people in the old crowd." Amara opened the takeout containers. "And you're probably right, and I'm still not going." "Preston won't be there." Madison sat down. "I specifically checked." Amara looked up. "He was invited. He declined. Apparently he has something in Seoul that weekend." Madison met her eyes. "I wouldn't bring you somewhere he'd be. Come on." "It's not about Preston." "Then what is it about?" Amara was quiet for a moment. She poured water for both of them. "It's about walking into a room where everyone already decided who I was when I was with him," she said. "Preston's girlfriend. The American. The decorator." She picked up her chopsticks. "I don't want to be those things anymore, and I don't know how to be anything else yet in a room like that." Madison let the silence sit for a beat. "Then go as Amara Bennett," she said. "Not anyone's girlfriend, not the decorator, just you. And if anyone gives you that look, you know the look, we leave. 20 minutes. If it's terrible, we go get beer." Amara ate. She thought about it. 30 minutes, she said. "Deal." The gallery space inside the park. Hyatt had been set up for serious money, the kind of event where the champagne was real and the small talk had purposes. Amara recognized the formula immediately. Businessmen looking for connections, politicians performing accessibility, wealthy families using philanthropy as social infrastructure. She had been in rooms like this dozens of times on Preston's arm and had spent most of those evenings navigating the particular experience of being noticed for the wrong reasons and overlooked for the right ones. She wore a deep burgundy dress she had bought a year ago and never taken out of the bag. She had done her own hair, natural, upswept, and she was wearing the earrings her mother had given her when she graduated, which she almost never wore because they felt too important for ordinary occasions. Madison had moved through the room 15 minutes in to find someone she knew from her firm, and Amara had let her go, claiming she was fine, which she mostly was. She found herself standing in front of a Korean landscape painting near the far end of the gallery. It was a traditional ink and pigment work, depicting a mountain scene in autumn, and it was being ignored in the way that certain things get ignored when they're placed incorrectly. Not because there's anything wrong with them, but because they've been put in a context that doesn't allow them to be seen properly. The problem was the lighting. Whoever had hung it had positioned it beneath two harsh gold-toned spotlights that flattened the depth of the inkwork and made the subtle gradations of the mountain shadows read as muddy rather than nuanced. The painting wasn't designed for direct warm light. It needed the kind of diffused, cooler illumination that traditional Korean galleries used, the kind that let the inkwork breathe. She was studying the upper left corner of the painting. The way the ink had been applied in three separate layers that you could only see if you looked at exactly the right angle, when someone stopped beside her. She didn't look right away. She assumed it was another gallery goer. "Everyone has walked past that painting at least twice," the man said. "You're the only person who stopped." She turned. He was taller than she had expected, and still in a way that felt deliberate rather than passive, the kind of stillness that comes from having nothing to prove. He was wearing a dark suit with no tie, and there was a particular quality to his attention, directed at her, that she hadn't encountered in a long time. It wasn't appreciation of the obvious kind. It was something more like genuine interest. She'd heard of Kang Min-jae. Everyone in Busan's connected circles had. His name existed in rooms before he entered them, carried in the way people mentioned him. Carefully, with a specific quality of precision, as if the wrong word might have consequences. He ran a legitimate import and logistics operation that spanned several sectors. He also ran things that didn't appear in any business filings, and that part of his world was understood without being spoken about directly. She had never been in the same room as him before. "The painting's not the problem," she said. "It's the lighting." He looked at the painting. "Explain." It wasn't a request exactly, but it wasn't a command either. It was the kind of direct interest that expected to be met directly. "The painter worked in the traditional method," she said. "That means the piece was designed to be viewed in diffused northern light, the kind that moves through a window at a low angle, no direct source. These spotlights are pointed straight at it, and the color temperature is about 3000 Kelvin. Too warm, too direct. It's killing the ink work." She pointed to the upper section. "See how the mountain gradations look flat? That's not the painting. That's what happens when you light something for drama instead of for truth." He looked at the spot she indicated. "You're an artist," he said. "Designer," she said. "Interior spaces, primarily. I have a background in visual arts." "You see the painting for what it is." "I see what's hiding it." He turned from the painting to her with that same quality of attention, and something in his expression had shifted in a way that was difficult to name. Across the room, through two clusters of guests and a moving server with a tray, Amara did not notice Preston Calloway, who was not supposed to be there and had arrived an hour late and was now watching from a distance with an expression that was not quite shock and not quite recognition, but was something very much like the beginning of regret. "Kang Min-jae," the man beside her said. She looked at him evenly. "Amara Bennett," she said. He nodded once, like she had said something that confirmed something he'd already suspected. "The lighting," he said, looking back at the painting. "Is it fixable?" "Completely," she said. "Replace the warm spots with cooler, diffused sources, or just move it to the north wall." She paused. "Whether anyone wants to bother is a different question." "Some things are worth the trouble of moving," he said. He said it plainly, without performance, the way people said things they meant entirely. Amara looked at the painting. She thought about the last 3 years, about the fellowship she hadn't extended, about the referrals she'd declined, about an elevator on the 32nd floor and a ring in her coat pocket and the specific sound of her own name spoken by someone who thought she wasn't worth the trouble. "Yes," she said quietly. "Some things are." Madison found her 20 minutes later, standing near the same painting, holding a glass of champagne she hadn't touched. "You're still in the same spot," Madison said. "I was talking to someone." Madison looked around. "Who?" "Kang Min-jae." The champagne glass in Madison's hand paused mid-lift. She set it down on a passing tray with the careful precision of someone buying time to arrange their expression. "Kang Min-jae," she repeated. "He asked about the painting." "Amara." Madison turned to face her fully. "That man does not make small talk, ever. He does not walk up to strangers at charity events and ask about paintings. She lowered her voice. Half the people in this room have been trying to get 5 minutes with him for the last 2 years. He seemed interested in the lighting problem. He seemed... Madison stopped. She looked at Amara the way she sometimes looked at financial reports that didn't add up. Are you serious right now? The piece was hung wrong, Amara said. I was explaining it. And he just stood there and let you. He asked me to. Madison picked up a new champagne glass from another passing tray and drank from it immediately. Okay, she said. Okay. I need you to understand something. The last person who tried to have an unsolicited conversation with that man at a public event, an investor, someone from Seoul, very well connected, walked away looking like he'd been hollowed out from the inside. He was fine with me. I can see that. Madison's voice had shifted into something quieter, more careful. That's what I'm telling you. That's not normal. Amara looked back at the painting. Min-jae had moved to another part of the room. She could see him near the east window, in conversation with two older men who had the particular posture of people desperate to appear relaxed. He didn't look in her direction. We should go, Amara said. We absolutely should not go, Madison said. They stayed another hour. Atat. She didn't expect to hear from him. She hadn't given him her number. They had spoken for perhaps 15 minutes total, and while the conversation had felt genuinely different from most conversations she'd had in the last 3 years, she was also aware that she was a woman who had recently misjudged a man for a significant period of time, and her instincts were not exactly operating at full reliability. She went home, hung up the burgundy dress, and went to bed. 3 days later, her phone rang from a number she didn't recognize, a Busan area code. She almost didn't pick up. Ms. Bennett, the voice was the same, unhurried, direct. I'm calling about a space. I have an office building near Hyundai, 4 floors, currently under renovation. The interior design firm I contracted withdrew 2 weeks ago due to a scheduling conflict. I was told you work in commercial and residential design. She sat up straighter. Who told you that? I asked around. She absorbed that. You looked me up. Yes. There was no apology attached to it, no softening, just the fact, delivered plainly. Mr. Kong, Min-jae. Min-jae. She stood up and walked to her window. The harbor was gray-green in the morning light. I should tell you that I've been primarily out of the commercial market for about 2 years. I've been doing smaller residential work. I know. Then you know I'm not the obvious choice for a 4-floor commercial renovation. The obvious choice withdrew, he said. I'm not interested in obvious choices. She was quiet for a moment. I'd want to see the space before I agreed to anything, she said. Of course. And I'd need to bring my own subcontractors. I don't work with teams I haven't vetted. That's reasonable. I'd also need the full brief, previous design plans, what they'd already done, structural constraints, your timeline. I'll have everything ready, he said. Thursday, 10 in the morning. She looked at her reflection in the dark glass of the window. She looked, she thought, like someone who had started waking up again after a long sleep. Thursday, she said. What? The building was a 12-story structure 2 blocks from the beachfront, the kind of architectural frame that had been built 30 years ago and renovated twice in ways that didn't quite commit to any single vision. The bones were solid, good bones actually if you knew how to read them. But the previous design firm had been planning to cover everything that was interesting about it with the kind of aesthetic that said money without saying anything else. Min-jae met her in the lobby with a project manager named Choi, who handed her a folder of schematics and previous plans and watched her in the way that people sometimes watched Amara in professional settings, waiting to see if she actually knew what she was looking at or was performing knowledge. She knew what she was looking at. She spent 40 minutes going through the building, asking questions, making notes, pointing out things she liked and things that would need to change. And by the time they returned to the lobby, Min-jae had sent Choi to deal with a call, and it was just the two of them standing in the empty ground floor space with afternoon light coming through the east-facing windows. The previous firm wanted to drop the ceiling on floors 2 through 4, she said, looking up. That's a mistake. You've got original concrete work up there that's better than anything they'd put in its place. Can you keep it? I can do better than keep it. I can make it the thing the whole floor is designed around. She looked at him. It changes the budget. In which direction? Down, initially. Restoration costs less than replacement if you know what you're restoring. She paused. But I'd want to spend more on lighting throughout. I have opinions about lighting. Something crossed his face that she was beginning to recognize, not quite a smile, but the outer edge of one. I know, he said. They walked the ground floor again while she talked through her vision, and he listened in the specific way that some people had of listening. Not just waiting for their turn to speak, but actually tracking what she said, asking follow-up questions that proved he'd understood the previous point. It was, she realized, disarming. She had gotten so used to performing expertise at people who weren't entirely listening that genuine attention felt slightly foreign. Why interior design, he asked at one point. She thought about the standard answer, the one about space and human experience and the way environments shape behavior, and set it aside. Because I'm good at seeing what something actually is, she said, versus what someone decided it should be. He looked at her steadily. Those are different things. Usually very different. They were standing near the east wall, and the afternoon light was doing something specific and good across the raw concrete, and for a moment neither of them said anything, and it wasn't uncomfortable. I'll take the project, she said. He nodded. She didn't let herself read too much into any of it on the drive home. He was a client, a significant client, the kind of project that could genuinely reopen doors she had let close. She was going to do the best work of her recent career, and she was going to be professional, and she was absolutely not going to complicate it by letting the way he listened become something she depended on. She was back in her apartment, making notes on her initial observations, when her phone buzzed with a text from a number she didn't know. Preston Calloway is asking about you. You should know. No name. She stared at it for a long moment, then set the phone face down on the table and kept writing. Preston had always been good at gathering information. It was one of the things that made him effective, knowing what other people were doing before they expected anyone to notice. He had a particular network, built over years of careful social maintenance, and that network operated on a currency of gossip, small favors, and the particular pleasure people took in being the first to tell something. The first thing he heard was from a woman named Ji Soo, who worked in corporate events and had been at the Park Hyatt charity exhibition. She mentioned, in passing, that Kang Min-jae had spent an unusual amount of time talking to an American woman near one of the gallery paintings. She described the woman briefly: tall, dark-skinned, natural hair, burgundy dress. Preston knew who it was before Jisoo finished the description. He sat with that information for 2 days. On the third day, he heard from someone inside his own business network that Min-jae's Hyundai renovation project had changed hands, and the new interior designer was a Black American woman based in Busan. He put his coffee cup down very carefully on his desk and stared at the wall for a while. The thing about Preston Calloway was that he was not a man who experienced jealousy the way most people did, as a feeling that passed through and left. He experienced it the way certain people experienced insults, as something that required a structural response. His father had been the same way. It wasn't emotional, not exactly. It was more like a problem-solving instinct attached to the wrong triggers. He called a contact named Bae Sang-hoon, who handled communications and media for 3 mid-sized corporations, and occasionally operated as an informal conduit for the kind of information that didn't move through official channels. I need to know what Min-jae's current exposure points are, Preston said. Anything business-related that's running through Amara Bennett's contract. Bae was quiet for a moment. Preston, you're talking about Kang Min-jae. I'm aware of who I'm talking about. You understand that if he finds out you're asking questions, he won't. Another silence. What are you looking for exactly? I'll know it when I find it, Preston said, and ended the call. The renovation project moved faster than Amara had expected, partly because she had stopped second-guessing herself, and partly because Min-jae's team was, to their credit, efficient. She came to the building 3 times a week, sometimes more. She developed a working relationship with the site crew that was built on her being direct about what she wanted and not treating the workers as interchangeable. Min-jae came by the site twice in the first 3 weeks. He didn't hover or interfere. He asked questions, registered her answers, and left her alone to work. It was, she told Madison, the most functional professional relationship she'd had in years. He comes to the site twice a week and asks about your work, Madison said. They were in Amara's apartment, Madison cross-legged on the floor with a bowl of ramen, Amara sketching lighting plans at the table. twice in 3 weeks, Amara corrected, and texts you. About the project. Madison looked at her bowl. Madison. I didn't say anything. You made a sound. I made a sound about my ramen. Madison looked up. I'm just observing that for a man who runs a criminal empire and doesn't make small talk, he seems to find a lot of project-related reasons to be in contact with you. He's a client. He's also a client, Amara said firmly, and went back to her sketch. But she was not unaware, that the conversations had started running past the project. Not by much. Not in any way she could point to and say, there, that's where it changed. It happened in the small margins, the way Min-jae would ask how she was sleeping, and she would answer honestly without thinking about it because his directness seemed to require directness back. The way he'd told her once, without apparent agenda, that the work she was doing on the building was better than anything the previous firm had proposed, and said it not as a compliment designed to produce a response, but as a plain observation. She found herself thinking about the painting at the gallery, the way he had stopped beside her. Everyone has walked past that painting at least twice. She was at the site on a Friday afternoon going over electrical plans with the head contractor when Min-jae appeared on the third floor with a man she hadn't seen before. They were in conversation, and the other man's posture was the specific posture of someone receiving information they didn't particularly want. Min-jae's face was still. The conversation ended. The man left. Min-jae walked toward her. Problem? She asked. Nothing that concerns the project. He looked at the electrical plan she was holding. Are you still planning the track lighting for the north corridor? Change my mind. I want something recessed, adjustable. I found a supplier in Seoul with the right color temperature. She showed him the spec sheet. It costs about 12% more per unit. He looked at it briefly. Fine. You didn't even look at the total. I looked at enough. He handed back the spec sheet. I trust your judgment on what the space needs. She held the paper and said nothing for a moment. That's a significant amount of trust for someone you've known 6 weeks, she said. I watched you explain a painting's lighting problem to a room full of people who didn't ask, he said. You weren't performing, you just saw it. He looked at the ceiling, at the raw concrete she'd insisted on keeping. People who see things clearly don't usually have to pretend. Amara put the spec sheet into her folder. Her hands were completely steady. She was proud of that. I should get back to the contractor, she said. Of course. He turned to leave, then stopped. Are you available Saturday? There's something I'd like your opinion on, not related to this project. I can explain over dinner if you're willing. She looked at him. Dinner, she said. Yes. She was quiet for 3 seconds. She counted them. Saturday, she said. Where? Madison's response to this information was to say nothing for an unusually long time and then say, Amara. I know. Amara. I know what you're going to say. Do you? Because I'm not sure you do. Madison leaned forward. They were at a coffee shop near the waterfront, and Madison had the expression of someone trying very hard to be measured and finding it difficult. He is not Preston. He is not a version of Preston. He is a genuinely different category of person, and I want you to go to dinner, and I want you to have a good time, but I also want you to understand what you're walking into. I'm walking into dinner. You're walking into the orbit of a man who has people in this city who are afraid of him. People are afraid of a lot of things. Amara. Madison's voice dropped. I did some asking around. After the gallery, I know people who work in sectors adjacent to his legitimate operations, and every single one of them, said the same thing. They said he is fair, but he is not safe. They said he's never been anything but completely consistent, which in his world means something very specific. She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. I'm not saying don't go. I'm saying go in with your eyes open. Amara looked out the window at the water. My eyes were closed for 3 years, she said, with someone who seemed completely safe. She looked back at Madison. I'm not making that trade again. Madison was quiet. Okay, she said finally. Then go. And call me when you get home. I will. And Amara. Madison met her eyes. Wear the burgundy dress again. The restaurant was small and private in the way that only serious money could arrange. Not ostentatious, not performing exclusivity, just genuinely separate from the noise of the rest of the city. Minji was already there when she arrived, and he stood when she came to the table, which was a detail she filed away without comment. The thing he wanted her opinion on turned out to be a second property, a traditional Korean hanok compound on the outskirts of Busan that had been in a state of managed disrepair for a decade, and that he was considering acquiring for what he described, with characteristic economy of language, as a personal project rather than a commercial one. He showed her photographs on his phone. She leaned in to look, and they were close in the way that required attention to manage, and she managed it. "The bones are extraordinary," she said, scrolling through the images. "That courtyard, when was this built?" Original structure is late Joseon period. Some sections were rebuilt in the early 20th century. The interior was modified? She stopped on a photo of a main hall. "The proportions are wrong here. Someone put in a dropped ceiling at some point. Can it be corrected?" "With time and someone who knows what they're looking at, yes." She handed him back his phone. "Why personal?" He looked at her steadily. "Because not everything I do is for business." She looked at the tablecloth for a beat, then back up. "Fair enough," she said. The food arrived. A progression of dishes she hadn't ordered, which meant he'd arranged them in advance. And they ate and talked, and the conversation moved between the hanok and her work history, and a question he asked about Howard University that made her realize he'd looked her up more thoroughly than she'd initially registered. "You researched me," she said. "I told you that on the phone." "I thought you meant basic professional information." "I was thorough." He didn't look apologetic. "I wanted to know who I was working with. And you're someone who left a successful track in New York for a fellowship in Korea," he said. "You left the fellowship because—" He stopped. "Because of Preston," she said. It was the first time she'd said his name to Min-jae. "He had reasons he wanted me less visible, and I was—" She picked up her glass. "I was accommodating." Min-jae said nothing. "You can say it," she said. "Say what?" "That it was a mistake." "I don't think that's mine to say." He looked at her. "I think you already know." She took a drink of water. "What I know," she said carefully, "is that I had things I wanted that I set down because someone made me believe the relationship was more important than the things." She set her glass down. "And then I found out the relationship wasn't what I thought it was." "What did you think it was?" "Something that would last," she said. "Something I was choosing freely." She shook her head slightly. "I wasn't choosing. I was just adjusting. Every time he needed me smaller, I got a little smaller, and I told myself it was love." Min-jae was looking at her with the specific intensity she had learned in the last several weeks, to sit with rather than deflect. "You're not small," he said. "No," she agreed. "I'm not." They walked out of the restaurant at 10:30, and he put her in a car and did not try to prolong the evening beyond what it was, and she found that restraint, that particular way he had of not reaching for more than what was offered, more unnerving than if he had. She called Madison from the car. "How was it?" Madison asked immediately. "Good," Amara said. "Good how?" Amara looked out the window at the lit-up waterfront scrolling past. "Good in a way that makes me careful," she said. What neither of them knew, sitting in that restaurant, was that 3 blocks away, in a car parked on a side street, a man named Bae Sang-hoon was sending a text message with 2 photographs attached. The photographs had been taken through a telephoto lens. They showed Amara and Min-jae at the restaurant table, leaning close over his phone. In the photographs, they looked like people who had known each other a long time. The message went to Preston Calloway. Preston read it at 11 o'clock at night, sitting at his desk in Seoul, where he'd been going over a quarterly report that had suddenly become less interesting. He looked at the photographs for a long time. Then he opened a second messaging application, one that routed through a server in a different country, and sent a message of his own. "Start on the financial angle. I want documentation connecting her name to his accounts by end of month. Make it look like she came to him for a reason other than design." What? The renovation work was going well, which meant Amara was sleeping better than she had in months and waking up with her mind already running through problems she wanted to solve. This was a physical state she recognized from her best years. That specific alertness that came from doing work she actually cared about. She was at the site on a Tuesday morning when Min-jae called. "Are you free this afternoon?" he said. "I have a contractor meeting at 2. "After." After is fine. What's happening? I want to show you something. At the Hanok. A pause. If you're willing. She was willing. They went separately and arrived within minutes of each other. The compound was everything the photographs had suggested and more. A set of connected buildings arranged around two courtyards. The original timber frame still standing, the roof tiles mostly intact despite the years of neglect. It smelled like old wood and wild grass, and the particular dampness of a place that had been sealed too long. She walked through every room. She took notes. She asked questions about load-bearing elements and water damage, and the history of which sections had been modified and which were original. Min-jae answered what he could and was straightforward about what he didn't know. In the inner courtyard, she stopped. There was an old ginkgo tree in the center, enormous, probably 200 years old, and the afternoon light was coming through its leaves and casting the kind of shadows that certain spaces spent enormous amounts of money trying to manufacture and never quite achieved. This courtyard, she said. Yes, he said. This is why you're buying it. He was quiet for a moment. Among other reasons. She looked at him. I was standing a few feet away, and the light was on him, and he was looking at the tree, and she thought, she had the clear, uncomplicated thought, that she was in real trouble here, the good kind, the kind that meant something was real. Min-jae, she said it before she'd fully decided to. He looked at her. What are we doing? She asked. He held her gaze without flinching, which she was beginning to understand was simply how he was. He didn't look away from things. I think you know, he said. I think I do, she said. I'm asking if you know. A very small pause. Yes, he said. I know. The word landed quietly between them. Not a declaration, not a move. Just an honest answer from a man who appeared constitutionally incapable of offering anything else. She looked back at the ginkgo tree. I need to be careful, she said. I know that too. Not because of you specifically, she said. Because of me. Because I have some fairly recent evidence that my judgment was operating in a situation designed to erode it, he said. Not an argument, not a dismissal of her concern. Just a correction of the premise. She turned to look at him. That's a generous interpretation, she said. It's an accurate one. They stood in the courtyard with the old tree and the afternoon light, and she was aware, in a way that had nothing to do with reason, that something was beginning that she would not be able to take back. She was also aware that she didn't want to. It was Madison who first noticed the name appearing in the wrong places. She was at her firm, running a routine cross-reference on a set of financial documents related to a corporate audit she was consulting on, when a name surfaced in a supplementary document she hadn't been looking for. Amara D. Bennett, listed as a financial beneficiary on a discretionary account linked to 3 shell entities that were connected through 2 intermediary steps to Kong Min-jae's import operations. Madison stared at the document for a long time. The account had been opened 6 weeks ago, the same week the renovation contract was signed. She knew immediately and with complete certainty that something was wrong. Not with Amara, she knew Amara with the kind of bone-deep confidence that years of genuine friendship built. But with the document, with its existence, with the timing. She printed it, put it in her bag, and called Amara from the parking structure of her office building. I need to see you, she said. Tonight. Don't ask questions yet. Amara was quiet. That bad? I don't know what it is, Madison said. That's the problem. She drove to Amara's apartment with the document in her bag and her hands very steady on the wheel, because Madison Carter had learned a long time ago that the moment when things started falling apart was exactly the wrong time to panic. Amara looked at the document for 3 minutes without speaking. Then she set it on the table and looked at Madison. I've never had an account with any of these entities, she said. I know. My name shouldn't be anywhere near this. I know. Which means someone put it there. Madison nodded. Amara looked at the document again. Her face was doing the thing it sometimes did when she was processing something large, going very still, the way a surface went still before it cracked. Who had access to my name, my identification details, and enough knowledge about Min-jae's financial structure to do something like this? Amara said. They looked at each other. The answer was already in the room with them, and it had the specific shape and history and precise cruelty of a man who had once called her comfortable and had been watching, ever since, for an opportunity to make sure she paid for leaving. Amara picked up her phone. She was going to call Min Jae, but before she could dial, a notification appeared, a news alert from one of Seoul's major financial news outlets, with a headline that made her stop completely. Busan businessman Kang Min Jae faces financial misconduct investigation. Employee linked to fraudulent accounts. The article had been live for 11 minutes. Her name was in the third paragraph. Amara read the article 3 times. Not because she didn't understand it the first time. She understood it perfectly the first time. She read it 3 times because there was a particular kind of shock that required repetition before the body caught up with what the mind already knew. The kind that sat in the chest like a stone dropped into still water, the ripples spreading outward in every direction at once. Her name was in the third paragraph. Amara D. Bennett, an American interior designer contracted by Kong Enterprises for a commercial renovation project in Haeundae, has been identified as a named beneficiary in accounts currently under investigation. The article was careful with its language. Identified, not accused, under investigation, not charged. But careful language in a public article about financial misconduct was its own specific kind of damage. The care didn't soften it. The care was the point. It made the implication deniable while ensuring the damage was done. Madison was watching her from across the table. "How long has this been live?" Amara said. "The notification came 11 minutes ago, so 12 minutes. Who filed the complaint that triggered the investigation? The article doesn't name the source." Amara set the phone down. She pressed both hands flat on the table and looked at the wall behind Madison's head and breathed in and out twice, steadily, the way she'd taught herself a long time ago when things went sideways and falling apart was not an option. "Someone filed a formal complaint," she said, "with documentation. My name on accounts I've never touched. Time to go public before either Min Jae or I knew it was coming." She looked at Madison. "This didn't happen in the last few days?" "No," Madison said. "The account was opened 6 weeks ago. The documentation would have taken time to construct. This was planned, start to finish, at least 2 months back. Which means someone started building this before Min Jae and I had anything that could be called a relationship." Amara's voice was completely flat. "Which means this isn't about what I am to him. This is about what it would look like." Madison nodded once. "Preston," Amara said, not a question. "He has the resources," Madison said. "He has the access. He's been in Min Jae's legitimate business network for 3 years. He would know enough about the corporate structure to know where to attach something that would look plausible." She paused. "And he has the specific kind of motivation that doesn't require logic, just wounded ego and too much time." Amara stood up. She walked to the window and stood looking out at the harbor lights. The water was black and silver in the dark, and completely indifferent to the fact that her life had just been publicly attached to a financial fraud she had nothing to do with. "I need to call Min Jae," she said. "Yes," Madison said. "You do. But Amara, before you do." She waited until Amara turned around. "Be ready for the possibility that this conversation is going to be the hardest one you've had with him. Because from where he's standing, this article just appeared with your name in it, and even if he trusts you, he might not," Amara said quietly. "I'm not saying he won't. I'm saying be ready." Amara looked at her phone. She dialed. He picked up on the second ring, which told her he'd already seen it. "I saw the article," she said before he could speak. A silence on his end. Not the silence of someone surprised. The silence of someone who was choosing words with the kind of care that meant the conversation was already difficult. "I know," he said. "I didn't open those accounts." "I know that." She exhaled, slowly. "You know." "I had my people look at the documentation within 20 minutes of the article going live," he said. "The accounts were opened from an IP address in Seoul. The identification documents used were photocopies. The scans have compression artifacts that match a specific type of printer used by 3 corporate service providers in the Gangnam district." His voice was level, professional, in a way that reminded her, sharply, that the man she was talking to had infrastructure most people couldn't imagine. "This was constructed. The question is not whether you did it." "Then what is the question?" Another silence, longer. "The question," he said carefully, "is who had access to your identification documents, knowledge of my financial structure, and reason to want both of us associated with something like this. Amara looked at Madison. I think you already know the answer to that, she said. I have a name in mind, he said. I want to make sure it's the same name. Preston, she said. The silence this time had a different texture. Yes, he said. She went to his office the next morning. Not the construction site, his actual office, in a building near the port that was all clean lines and heavy glass, and the specific quiet of a space where significant things happened. She had never been there before. The woman at the front desk recognized her name immediately, which meant he had called ahead, which meant he had been expecting her even though she hadn't said she was coming. He was standing when she was shown in, and he was alone, and the room had the particular quality of a space where the air had already been charged before she arrived. Not hostile, not warm, just pressurized. She sat down across from his desk without being invited to. He sat. Tell me everything you know about Preston's access to your corporate structure, she said. Not what you suspect. What you know. He looked at her for a moment. Then he opened a file on the desk and turned it so she could read it. Preston Calloway had been operating as a mid-level consultant on Kong Enterprises' legitimate import logistics branch for 2 years and 8 months. His role was narrowly defined, vendor relationship management, specifically for 2 European manufacturing clients. His access to internal financial systems was supposed to be limited to the project management portal. Supposed to be, Amara said. We discovered this morning that his access credentials were used on 14 separate occasions to query sections of the financial system he had no authorization to be in. Minjae's voice was very quiet. The queries were structured carefully, small enough not to trigger automated alerts. He was looking for exactly what he needed to build a convincing document. Amara looked at the access logs in the file. 14 separate occasions spanning 8 weeks. Preston, in his business casual blazers and his careful social smile, sitting somewhere and systematically mapping Minjae's financial structure one careful query at a time, planning it before there was even anything real between her and Minjae to be jealous of. He started this before we even had dinner, she said. Within 2 weeks of the gallery exhibition, Minjae confirmed. She set the file down. So seeing us together that night was enough. She said it to herself as much as to him. He didn't need there to be anything real. He just needed the optics. He's good at optics. She looked up sharply. There was something in Minjae's voice. Not bitterness, exactly, but a specific weight. You knew him before I started working with you, she said. You knew him for years. Yes. Did you know about Elena Voss? The question came out of her before she'd fully formed it, and she watched Minjae's face do something she hadn't seen it do before. A small, controlled tightening around the eyes that was not quite a flinch, but was adjacent to one. She had heard the name 2 weeks ago. A woman in Madison's professional network had mentioned it in passing. Elena Voss, a Danish businesswoman based in Seoul who had been quietly involved with Preston Calloway for at least a year. Overlapping entirely with the last year of his relationship with Amara. The woman had mentioned it the way people mention things they assumed you already knew. Amara had not already known. She had sat with that information for 2 weeks without saying anything to anyone except Madison, turning it over, waiting to understand what it meant and why it bothered her in a specific way that was different from the original herd of the ring and the hallway and the word comfortable. And she had eventually located the specific thing. It wasn't about Preston's betrayal anymore. It was about what it meant if Minjae had known. Did you know about Elena? She asked again. He met her eyes. Yes. The word was quiet and entirely undefended, and it landed in the room like something dropped from a height. She sat very still. When did you know? Approximately 7 months before you left him. 7 months. She counted backward without meaning to. 7 months before she left was 4 months after she had turned down the design referrals, 5 months after she had declined the fellowship extension. Deep inside the architecture of decisions she had believed were her own. 7 months, she said. Yes. And you... She stopped. Started again. You were in the same business circles as Preston. You knew he was involved with someone else while he was with me. While I was... She pressed her lips together. While I was making myself smaller so his life would run more smoothly. Minjae said nothing. He didn't look away. Why didn't you tell me? I didn't know you, he said. We met at the gallery. Before that, he said. I was aware of you before the gallery. Preston mentioned you. In business context, as a footnote, the way he mentioned things he considered peripheral, I knew who you were before we spoke. This was new information. She absorbed it without letting it move her expression. So you knew about me, she said. You knew about Elena. And I didn't have a relationship with you, he said. I had no basis on which to intervene in someone else's private life with information that would cause significant harm. You had a basis, she said. You had the fact that a woman was being lied to. By a man I had business dealings with, he said. If I had come to you, a stranger, and told you your partner was involved with someone else, what would that have looked like? She knew what it would have looked like. She knew he was right. She also knew that knowing he was right did not touch the specific coldness that had settled in her chest. You saw me at the gallery, she said. You approached me. You gave me a contract. You had dinner with me. Her voice was steady and measured, and each word cost something. At any point in those weeks, you could have told me. Yes, he said, I could have. Why didn't you? He looked at her directly. Because by the time I knew you well enough to tell you, I was already involved in how this went for you. He said the word involved like he was being careful with it. And I was afraid that telling you then would look like I was destroying Preston's credibility to clear a path for myself. I didn't want to be another powerful man making decisions about your life without your consent. She looked at him for a long time. So you protected me, she said. I thought I was. Without asking if I wanted protection. He held her gaze. Yes. She stood up. She didn't raise her voice. She had learned, a long time ago, that the loudest version of anger was rarely the most precise, and what she needed right now was precision. Preston controlled me by lying to me, she said. He kept truth from me because it served him. I understand that. I understand exactly what he is. She picked up her bag from the floor beside the chair. But you kept truth from me because you decided I needed protection. You decided what I was ready to know. You made a judgment about what information I could handle and when I could handle it. And you made that judgment for me, without me, because you thought you knew better. She looked at him. Do you understand why that is not better? He did not try to argue. He did not try to minimize. Yes, he said, I understand. I need you to say what you actually did, she said, not a version of it that sounds like care. A long pause. I knew your partner was betraying you, he said. I chose not to tell you. I told myself it was to protect you and to protect my own integrity. But part of it, he stopped. Part of it was that I didn't want to be the reason your life fell apart. Because he stopped again. Already what? Already cared what happened to you, he said, before I had any right to. She stood in the middle of the room and looked at this man who had resources and influence and the kind of stillness that came from absolute authority over his world, and who had, apparently, been afraid. Of looking like something he wasn't. Of being a man who used power badly even when he wasn't trying to. She understood the fear. That was the terrible part. She understood it, and it did not change what he had done. I'm going to go home, she said. Amara, I'm not ending anything, she said, because she could feel what he was about to ask. I'm going home because I need to think without you in the room, and you, she looked at him steadily. You need to sit with what you did without immediately trying to fix it. Those are two different things, and they both need to happen. She left. She did not cry on his way home. She was past that particular response, had moved through it and into something colder and more structural. The feeling of examining a building you thought you knew and discovering a wall that shouldn't be there. Madison called before she was halfway home. How did it go? He knew about Elena, Amara said. For 7 months. Silence. Oh, Madison said very quietly. Yeah. Are you? I'm fine. I'm going to be fine. Amara looked out the car window. I need to think. I'll call you in a few hours. Okay? A pause. Amara, for what it's worth, and I know it doesn't fix anything, what he said about not wanting to look like another man using power to manipulate your situation, that's... Madison stopped. That's not nothing. I know, Amara said. That's what makes it complicated. She hung up and sat with the window and the city going past. The thing about discovering that two men had both made decisions on her behalf without consulting her, one out of selfishness, one out of what might genuinely have been care, was that the difference in motivation did not change the structural fact. Both of them had looked at Amara Bennett and decided they knew better than she did what she needed to know about her own life. One of them had done it for his own benefit, the other had done it because he was afraid of his own feelings. Neither of them had thought to simply ask her. She was home by noon. She sat at her desk and opened her laptop and did not look at the article again, because she had already memorized its architecture, and looking at it again would not give her anything new. Instead, she opened her emails and went through every professional contact she had in Busan and Seoul, every person who might have seen the article, every client who might be having second thoughts, every connection that might now require management. There were already 2 messages pulling back from potential projects. Polite, careful language. Nothing accusatory. Just the specific retreat of people who didn't want to be adjacent to something messy. She replied to both with equal politeness and significantly more clarity, stating directly that she was not under investigation, that her name had been fraudulently attached to documents without her knowledge, and that she was pursuing all appropriate means of correction. She kept her tone professional and her language precise, and she did not beg. Then she made a call she had been considering for a week, to a woman named Vanessa Reed. Vanessa was a journalist, Korean-American, based in Seoul, known for investigative financial reporting that had broken 3 major corporate fraud stories in the last 4 years. Amara had encountered her work through Madison's professional network and had been impressed by the specific quality of rigor in her reporting. Not the kind of rigor that made things bloodless, but the kind that made them unimpeachable. Vanessa picked up on the 3rd ring. "Reed." "My name is Amara Bennett," Amara said. "I think you may have seen my name in the financial news this morning." A pause. "Yes." "The documentation that attached my name to those accounts was constructed by someone with access to Min Jae's legitimate corporate systems and copies of my personal identification. I have evidence of both." She kept her voice even. "I also have reason to believe the same person has been systematically building a parallel narrative about my relationship with Min Jae that has no basis in fact. I think this is worth reporting." "Who's the someone?" Vanessa said. "A man named Preston Calloway. He's a consultant in Min Jae's import logistics division. He had unauthorized access to internal financial systems over a period of approximately 8 weeks." A longer pause. "I need documentation," Vanessa said. "Not allegations, not impressions. I need the access logs, the account construction records, the identification document provenance." "Minji's internal team has the access logs. I have the original financial document Madison Carter, a financial analyst, found during a routine audit. And I have a recording." Vanessa was quiet. "What kind of recording?" "From the night I ended my relationship with Preston Calloway. My friend saved it without telling me. Preston's voice, his words, his assessment of me, and his expectations. It won't prove the fraud directly." She paused. "But it establishes the motivation with clarity." Another silence. Amara could hear Vanessa writing. "I'll need to verify everything independently," Vanessa said. "I know. I'm not asking you to print anything you can't verify. This is going to create significant exposure for you personally. If I start reporting on this and it turns out to be more complicated than you think, it will create less exposure than doing nothing and letting the current story stand," Amara said. Vanessa was quiet for a moment. "Send me what you have. I'll look at it tonight." Amara sent the files. She sat back in her chair afterward and looked at the ceiling, at the slightly uneven plaster, the small water stain near the window that she kept meaning to report to her landlord, the entirely ordinary imperfect surface of her ordinary apartment ceiling. And she breathed. She had done what she could today. She had drawn a line. She had contacted the one person who might be able to turn evidence into public truth, which was the only currency that would actually matter here. She had also walked out of her room after telling a man she was not ending things with him, which meant she was going to have to go back and finish that conversation at some point, and she had no idea yet what she was going to say or whether the things he'd done could be absorbed into something that continued. She didn't know. She was honest with herself about not knowing. Her phone buzzed. A message from Min Jae. "I should have told you. There is no version of my reasoning that makes that acceptable. I understand if you need distance. I will not reach out again until you do." She read it twice. Then she put the phone face down and went to make coffee. Vanessa Reed called back at 8:15 the following morning. It was different from the previous call, tighter, with the specific quality of a person who has found what they were looking for and is now managing what that means. The account construction records you sent. The compression artifacts on the identification document scans. I had a forensic contact look at them last night. He confirmed they're consistent with documents digitally reproduced from hard copy scans, not originals. Which means someone copied my ID documents. Physically or digitally, yes. The copies were then used to establish the accounts. A pause. Preston Calloway would have had access to your personal documents during your relationship. We lived together for 8 months, Amara said. He would have had access to everything. I need you to understand what I'm about to tell you, Vanessa said, because it changes the scope of this significantly. Amara stood very still in her kitchen. Tell me, she said. When I started looking at Preston Calloway's background last night, genuinely looking, not just the surface record, I found a pattern. Vanessa paused. This is not the first time he's done something like this. There was a business partner in Singapore 3 years before he came to Korea. A financial dispute that ended with the partner under investigation for account irregularities that were later quietly dropped. There was a woman in Seoul, not Elena Voss, someone before Elena, who found her name attached to a contract dispute she had no involvement in. The dispute was also quietly settled. Another pause. He does this. When people become obstacles or inconveniences, he constructs problems around them. And he's been careful enough each time that nothing has stuck. Amara set her coffee cup down on this counter. Until now, she said. Until now, Vanessa confirmed. Because this time, he attached himself to Min Jae's organization. And Min Jae's people keep significantly better records than a Singapore business partner or a woman in Seoul without institutional backing. Amara pressed one hand flat on the counter. The tile was cold under her palm. He knew Min Jae would have resources to fight back, she said. He knew Min Jae would push back on the investigation. So why? Because he didn't think it would get that far, Vanessa said. I think he expected Min Jae to distance himself from you the moment your name appeared publicly. Remove you from the project, break contact, protect his own reputation, and then you'd be exposed, publicly attached to a fraud investigation, professionally isolated, without Min Jae's institutional support, and Preston would have accomplished what he actually wanted. The room was very quiet. To destroy what I was rebuilding, Amara said. To make sure you couldn't go forward, Vanessa said, without him. Amara absorbed this. She absorbed the specific shape of it, the calculated patience of someone who had watched her leave and decided not that he had lost her, but that she was not permitted to leave. She absorbed the fact that she had lived with this man, cooked for this man, rearranged her professional life around this man's preferences, and the whole time he had been the kind of person capable of this. Systematically. With precedent. I need everything you have on the Singapore situation and the woman in Seoul, she said. Names, documentation, whatever is accessible. I'm working on it, Vanessa said. There's something else. Say it. Elena Voss, Vanessa said. I reached out to her last night. Amara went very still. She agreed to speak to me. Vanessa's voice was careful. She didn't know about you, not the full extent of it. She knew Preston had been in a long-term relationship. She said he told her it was ending, had been ending for over a year, that you were staying together for practical reasons, and that there was nothing real between you anymore. A pause. She believed him. Of course she did, Amara said quietly. He's very good at that. She's willing to go on record, Vanessa said, about the timeline, about what he told her, about what she knows of his methods. She's angry. A pause. Apparently he did something similar to her at the end, when she began to become inconvenient. Amara sat down on her kitchen floor. Not dramatically. She simply reached a point where standing required more effort than she had available, and the floor was there. She sat on the cold tile with her back against the cabinet and her phone in her hand and the morning light coming through the window, and she thought about Elena Voss, who had been lied to differently, but lied to completely, and who was angry enough to go on record. And she thought about how a man like Preston operated, not through force, not through noise, but through the careful, patient construction of realities that served him, one small deception at a time, until everyone around him was living inside a story he had written for them. She had been living inside that story for 3 years. She was not living in it anymore. "Vanessa," she said. "Yes." "When do you need everything by?" "The more complete the package, the stronger the story. But I can work with what I have if—" "Give me 48 hours, Amara said. "I'm going to get you Min Jae's access logs directly, not copies. The originals, with his team's technical verification attached." She paused. "And I'm going to get you Madison's original financial document with her audit trail. And the recording." "That's enough to run with," Vanessa said. "I know," Amara said, "but I want it to be more than enough." She ended the call. She sat on the kitchen floor for another 2 minutes. Then she stood up, straightened her shirt, picked up her coffee, and picked up her phone again. She dialed Min Jae. He picked up on the first ring. "I need the access log," she said. "The originals, with your technical team's verification. Full chain of documentation on Preston's unauthorized queries." She paused. "And I need you to be completely honest with me about everything you know. Every piece of information you have about Preston Calloway that you've been holding because you were deciding what I could handle." A silence. "Everything," he said. "Everything." Another silence, shorter this time. "Come to the office," he said. "I'll have it ready." She drove to the port building and rode the elevator to the top floor and walked into his office. And this time the pressurized quality of the air was different. Not the pressure of a difficult conversation, but the pressure of two people who have decided to stop managing each other and start telling the truth, which was its own kind of difficult and its own kind of necessary. He had the files open on the desk. He didn't sit. He stood on the opposite side and watched her approach, and his face had the quality of a man who had done something he couldn't undo and had decided that the only available dignity was complete honesty going forward. She looked at the files, then she looked at him. "Start at the beginning," she said. "Everything." And he did. Min Jae talked for 2 hours and 14 minutes. Amara knew the exact duration because she had pressed record on her phone the moment she sat down, not to use against him, but because she had learned, recently, specifically, in the last 72 hours, that her memory was not sufficient documentation, that the things people said in rooms needed to exist somewhere outside her own head if they were going to mean anything later. He told her everything. He told her that Preston had approached him 18 months ago through a mutual business contact in Seoul, presenting himself as a logistics consultant with strong European client relationships, that the initial contract had been straightforward and Preston had performed adequately, that Min Jae had known from his own sources within the first 6 months that Preston Calloway's personal presentation did not entirely match his actual history, that there had been a business dispute in Singapore, that there was a pattern of social positioning that served Preston more than it served any organization he was attached to. He had kept Preston on because the European client relationships were genuine and useful, and because Min Jae operated on the principle that people with managed roles and understood limitations were less dangerous than people who felt expelled and had motivation for retaliation. He had believed he could contain Preston. He had been wrong. He told her about Elena Voss, which was the part Amara had already known was coming, but had not prepared herself for adequately. He had learned about the relationship through a contact in Seoul's corporate social circuit. Not surveillance, not anything deliberate, just the specific porousness of elite social networks, where information moved without being sent. He had known for 7 months before Amara left, and he had held the information for the reasons he had already stated, and he was not revising those reasons, but he was also not asking her to accept them. He told her one more thing. The night of the gallery exhibition, the night she had been standing in front of the painting and he had walked over, had not been accidental. Not entirely. He had known she would be there. Madison's name had appeared on the guest list, and he had previously noted, through Preston's occasional professional mentions, that Amara and Madison were close. He had not engineered her attendance, but he had attended the exhibition knowing she might be present, and when he saw her standing alone in front of the one painting everyone else was ignoring, he had made a decision. "You went to her," Amara said. "Yes." "Because you already knew who she was." "Because I had heard about her for 8 months as a footnote in another man's professional life," he said. "And then I saw her standing in front of a painting that no one else in the room could see properly, explaining to herself why it was beautiful, and I thought, this is not a footnote." She looked at him for a long time. "That could sound like manipulation," she said. I know. You approached me under circumstances where you had significantly more information than I did. Yes, and you're telling me this now because you told me to tell you everything, he said, and because anything I keep now becomes the same thing Preston did. A decision made for you about what you're ready to know. He met her eyes. I won't do that again, even if what I'm telling you costs me something. She picked up her phone. She looked at the recording timer. 2 hours, 16 minutes now. She stopped it. Okay, she said. Okay? It's not forgiven, she said carefully. It's not dismissed, but it's registered. I understand what you did and why you did it, and I'm choosing to continue. She looked at him directly. But Minjae, if you make a decision about my life without my input again, I won't. Let me finish, she said. If you make a decision about my life without my input again, I will leave. Not in anger, not with a fight. I will simply leave, because I have done the version of this where I stay in situations that require me to be smaller than I am, and I will not do it again. I understand, he said. I need you to mean that. I mean it, he said, completely. She nodded once. Then she pulled the document folder toward her and opened the access logs. Then let's get to work, she said. The next 48 hours operated on a different kind of time, the compressed, airless time of a situation that required everything simultaneously. Amara barely slept. She moved between her apartment, Minjae's office, and Madison's dining table, which had become a kind of operational center covered in printed documents, laptops, and the remnants of food they kept forgetting to clear away. Vanessa Reed was meticulous. She called with questions at all hours, asked for clarifications on document provenance, requested additional sources to corroborate specific claims, pushed back on anything that had even a surface appearance of weakness. She was, Amara thought, exactly what this situation required. Someone who cared more about accuracy than momentum, who understood that a story with one soft spot would be used to discredit the whole. Minjae's technical team had produced a full forensic breakdown of Preston's unauthorized system access. 47 pages of log data, IP verification, timestamp analysis, and a technical summary written by a cybersecurity consultant who had previously worked for 3 major Korean financial institutions. The document was, in Vanessa's words when she received it, exactly the kind of thing that ends careers. Madison had reconstructed the full audit trail on the fraudulent financial document, the one that had her name on it, tracing the account construction through 4 intermediary entities back to a corporate service provider in Gangnam that had, according to Madison's research, processed similar arrangements for 2 other clients in the previous year. One of those clients' names appeared in a business filing that also contained Preston Calloway's name. It was not conclusive on its own. Combined with the access logs, it was close to airtight. Elena Voss had given Vanessa a recorded interview. Amara hadn't listened to it. She didn't need to. Vanessa told her that Elena had been precise, specific, and visibly furious, the kind of fury that produced the most useful testimony because it was entirely grounded in personal experience rather than inference. And Madison, on the second night, produced the recording. She had saved it on a secondary device, an old phone she used as a backup. The night Amara left Preston's apartment, standing outside his door with the takeout bag. She had not told Amara she'd recorded it because she hadn't known what to do with it, and had been afraid that revealing its existence would feel like a violation of something. You recorded it, Amara said. She was not angry. She was past the point of the ordinary scale of angry. I was outside, Madison said. I had tracked your location because you hadn't texted when you arrived, and I was worried. I got there as it was happening, and I didn't know what to do, so I just... She held out the old phone. I still don't know if I had the right. Play it, Amara said. Madison played it. They sat at the dining table and listened to Preston Calloway's voice. Relaxed, amused, performing for an audience of people who mattered to him. Describe Amara Bennett as comfortable. Describe her as lacking the family background, the connections, the social position. Describe 3 years of a woman's life as a temporary arrangement in the specific tone of someone who has never once considered that the woman might have a perspective worth considering. The recording was 43 seconds long. When it ended, the room was quiet. Amara looked at the phone on the table. Send it to Vanessa, she said. Madison sent it. Preston found out the investigation was coming apart on a Thursday morning. He found out not from an official source, but from Bai Sang-hoon, who had been monitoring the situation and who called Preston at 7:15 in the morning with a voice that was doing the specific work of sounding calm while being anything but. The access logs are compromised, Bai said. Min Jae's technical team filed a supplementary document with the investigating authority last night. They've traced the unauthorized queries. They have IP verification. Preston was standing in his kitchen in Seoul, still in the shirt he'd slept in, coffee in hand. He set the coffee down. That's a technical issue, he said. It doesn't prove intent. Preston, Bai's voice sharpened. They have 47 pages of documentation. The forensic breakdown specifically identifies the queries as targeted. The sections accessed correspond exactly to the information needed to construct the fraudulent accounts. A competent attorney will argue intent from the pattern alone. Then I need a better attorney. You need more than that. A pause. There's a journalist. Preston went very still. Vanessa Reed, Bai said. She's been making calls for 3 days. Elena Voss's assistant confirmed Reed spoke with her directly. Reed also requested financial records from the corporate service provider in Gangnam this morning. Preston put both hands flat on the kitchen counter. He knew Vanessa Reed's name. Anyone in Korean corporate circles who read financial reporting knew her name. She had a specific reputation, not for aggression, not for spectacle, but for the particular devastation of being completely correct. How far along is she, he said. Far enough that her editor has cleared 2 days for verification, Bai said, which means publication is likely within the week. Preston looked at the window. The Seoul skyline was gray and overcast, the kind of morning that pressed down. He recognized, miscalculated. Not the plan. The plan had been structurally sound. He had miscalculated Min Jae's response. He had assumed that Min Jae, with his reputation and his networks and his careful management of public exposure, would choose distance over engagement, would pull back from Amara, protect his organization, let the investigation run its course and quietly settle in a way that left Amara isolated and discredited. He had not calculated for the possibility that Min Jae would produce 47 pages of forensic documentation. He had not calculated for Madison Carter's audit work. He had not calculated for Vanessa Reed. He had not, and this was the specific failure he kept returning to, pressing on it like a bruise, calculated for the version of Amara Bennett who no longer arranged her world around other people's comfort. I need to control the narrative, Preston said, before she publishes. How? Preston thought for approximately 30 seconds. He had been good his entire professional life at the specific skill of finding leverage. He looked for it now. The point in the structure, the soft place, the thing that could be pressed. Min Jae's personal reputation, he said. Not the business. The business is too well documented now. I can't compete on that ground. But him personally, his other operations, the ones that don't appear in filings. Bai was silent for a long moment. Preston, he said carefully. You're talking about the Mafia boss of Busan. I'm talking about a man who has things he doesn't want public. Every man in his position has those things. He also has people specifically dedicated to making sure those things stay private. Bai's voice had dropped. This is not the Singapore situation. This is not a mid-level business partner or a woman without institutional support. If you go at him this way and it doesn't work, it'll work. And if it doesn't? Preston picked his coffee back up. His hand was steady. He had always been good at that, at performing steadiness when things were moving under his feet. Make some calls, he said. Find me something usable. I need you to understand what I'm saying, Bai said. I'm telling you that this man has infrastructure. If he decides you've become a problem that needs addressing outside of legal channels, he won't, Preston said. He's too careful. He's spent years building a legitimate face. He's not going to torch it by coming after me directly. A silence. I'll make the calls, Bai said. But Preston, I need you to hear me. This is the last thing I do for this situation. After this, I'm out. Preston ended the call. He stood in his kitchen for a moment, looking at nothing, the coffee cooling in his hand. Then he went to get dressed. Amara was at the construction site when her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. A Seoul prefix, unfamiliar sequence. She almost ignored it. She was in the middle of approving the lighting installation on the 3rd floor, the recessed fixtures she had specified, finally going in after a week of logistics delays, and she had been here since 7 in the morning, and she was tired in the good specific way of physical work well directed. She answered anyway. Ms. Bennett. The voice was male, middle-aged, with the particular cadence of someone who had rehearsed the opening of this call. My name is Bae Sang-hoon. I've worked in a consulting capacity with Preston Calloway. She stepped away from the contractor and walked to the far end of the floor, where the afternoon light came through the east windows and the noise of the installation was distant enough. I'm listening, she said. I want you to understand that I'm making this call without Preston's knowledge. A pause. And against my better professional instincts, which means I need you to understand that it's costing me something to make it. Say what you called to say. Preston is planning to go after Min Jae directly, Bae said. Not through legal channels. He's asking me to find material on Min Jae's other operations, the ones that aren't public. Another pause. I've told him I'm done after this. I'm telling you because what he did to you is beyond what I signed up for, and what he's planning to do next is beyond what I can be a part of. Amara looked out the window at the city below. Her heart was doing something specific and rhythmic that she was aware of in her throat. He's going to try to leak information about Min Jae's criminal operations, she said. He's going to try to find and leak, yes. Whether he can find anything credible is another question. Bae's voice was careful. But the attempt itself, if Min Jae's people learn Preston is making those inquiries, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Why are you telling me? She said. Because you have Vanessa Reed's story, he said. And if that story runs before Preston does something irreversible, there's still a version of this where nobody gets hurt in a way that can't be taken back. A long pause. I don't know if you can make that happen, but you have more ability to affect the timing than I do. He ended the call. She stood at the window for 8 seconds. She counted them. Then she called Vanessa Reed. How quickly can you publish? She said without preamble. A pause on Vanessa's end. I'm still in verification. Preston is about to do something that changes the nature of the situation significantly, Amara said. I can't give you the source, but I'm telling you that if the story runs before the end of this week, it contains Preston on his own actions and it ends there. If it runs after, the situation may become something else entirely. Silence. Tell me what you can, Vanessa said. He's trying to find material to expose Min Jae's criminal operations as retaliation. If he finds something and uses it, this becomes a completely different story, bigger, messier, with consequences that go well beyond a financial fraud case. You're asking me to accelerate publication. I'm telling you what I know and letting you decide, Amara said. That's all I can do. A long pause. I need to call my editor, Vanessa said. Give me 2 hours. Amara went back to the lighting installation and stood there watching the electricians work and focused on the specific technical details of the fixtures, the housing depth, the beam angle, the color temperature she had specified. And she kept her face entirely neutral and her breathing entirely steady, and she did not let herself calculate the ways this could still go wrong. She called Min Jae at noon. Preston is making inquiries, she said, about your other operations. Someone in his network contacted me. A silence, shorter than she expected. I know, he said. She stopped walking. You know. My people flagged the inquiries an hour ago. He's using intermediaries, but the trail isn't as clean as he thinks. A pause. He won't find anything credible. My exposure points are not accessible to someone at his level, and the people he's approaching don't have the information he thinks they have. You're not worried. I'm appropriately concerned, he said. I'm not reactive. There's a difference. He's desperate, she said. Desperate people make mistakes, he said. That's useful. Min Jae, she kept her voice even. I need you to promise me something. Say it. Whatever he finds or doesn't find, whatever he does next, you don't move against him in ways that aren't legal. She paused. I know what you're capable of. I'm asking you not to do it. A silence. Longer this time. Amara, promise me. What he's done to you. I know what he's done to me, she said. I'm the one it was done to, and I'm telling you, the way I want this to end is with the truth. Public, documented, undeniable. Not with whatever the other version of ending it looks like. She breathed. Promise me. Another silence. She could hear him breathing on the other end, and she knew, she had enough understanding of who he was now to know, that this was a genuine cost for him. That his instinct, shaped by years of operating in a world where problems were addressed directly and decisively, was pushing against what she was asking. "I promise," he said. She exhaled. "Thank you," she said. "Done." Vanessa called back at 2:15. "We're running it tomorrow morning," she said. 6 a.m. Seoul time. Full piece. The access logs, the account construction, the Singapore precedent, the Seoul precedent, the recording, Elena Voss's testimony. "My editor wants one more independent verification on the Gangnam corporate service provider connection. I have someone on it now." A pause. "It's going to be significant." "I know," Amara said. "I need you to be prepared for the response. When this runs, Preston will react. His representatives will issue denials. There may be attempts to discredit you personally. Your relationship with Min Jae, questions about your professional credibility, anything they can find." "Let them find it," Amara said. "My professional work is documented. My relationship with Min Jae is what it is. None of it touches the evidence." "No," Vanessa agreed. "It doesn't." A pause. "Miss Bennett, for what it's worth, the recording is the thing. His voice, his words, his assessment of you as someone temporary. It contextualizes everything else. It tells the reader who this man is before they even get to the forensic documentation." Amara was standing in her apartment by then, at the window, watching the harbor in the late afternoon light. "Madison saved it," she said. "I didn't even know." "Good friends are worth more than most people give them credit for," Vanessa said. "Yes," Amara said. "They are." She called Madison at 3. "It runs tomorrow," she said. Madison was quiet for a moment, then, "Okay." Her voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it. Relief, maybe, or the specific release of tension that came after days of extreme sustained effort. "How are you feeling?" "Strange," Amara said honestly, "like standing at the top of something very tall and looking down." "Good strange or bad strange?" Amara thought about it. "Both," she said. "That's fair." A pause. "What do you need tonight?" "Company," she said. "Not conversation, just someone in the room." "I'll bring food," Madison said. "Something real, not takeout." "You don't cook?" "I am capable of purchasing ingredients and following written instructions," Madison said with dignity. "That is functionally cooking." Amara laughed. It came out of her unexpectedly, genuine and a little rough. "Fine," she said. "Come over." Preston did not sleep Thursday night. He had gotten back nothing usable from the inquiries. Bay had been right that Min Jae's actual exposure points were not accessible through the channels Preston could reach. What he had gotten were fragments, rumors, the kind of unverifiable peripheral information that couldn't be published anywhere reputable and would not survive any serious scrutiny. He recognized at 2 in the morning, nothing. He sat in his Seoul apartment with his laptop open and the Seoul skyline dark outside his window, and he went through his options with the methodical precision he had always applied to problems. He was good at this. He had always been good at this, at finding the angle, the leverage point, the underexplored path through a situation that appeared closed. He kept coming back to the same wall. Amara had Vanessa read. She had the documentation. She had whatever Min Jae's team had put together. She had Madison, who was not a warm or forgiving person when crossed. She had Elena, who had apparently her own grievances and her own willingness to speak. He had nothing. At 3:30 in the morning, he sent a message to his attorney in Seoul. "Need to speak first thing tomorrow. Urgent." At 4, he tried to sleep and could not. At 5:15, he was drinking coffee in his kitchen when his phone rang. His attorney, already awake, who had seen the same signs Preston had not seen in time. "Preston," his attorney said, without preliminary. "I need you to hear me clearly. Do not make any public statements today. Do not speak to media. Do not respond to anything Bai Sang-hoon's name is attached to. Come to my office at 9. "What's happening?" "I don't know yet," his attorney said, "but I've had 2 calls in the last hour from journalists I trust, requesting comment on something that hasn't published yet, and that means it publishes today." Preston set his coffee cup down. "How bad?" he said. His attorney was quiet for a moment. "Come to the office at 9, he said. The article went live at 6:03 a.m. Amara read it on her phone in her kitchen, Madison asleep on the couch in the next room. The apartment was quiet except for the ambient sound of the harbor outside, and Madison's breathing and the specific silence of a morning that had not yet decided what kind of day it intended to be. The article was everything Vanessa had said it would be. It was precise, it was documented, it was entirely devoid of the editorializing that would have given Preston's response team anything to push against. It laid out the facts in sequence: the unauthorized access, the account construction, the fraudulent documentation, the pattern from Singapore, the pattern from Seoul, the timeline of Elena Voss's relationship, and the recording. The recording was quoted in the article. Not at length. Vanessa knew copyright and she knew evidence, and she knew the difference between what built a story and what overexposed it. But the key phrase was there, in quotation marks, attributed to an audio recording obtained by the paper, comfortable, and the context around it, and the date. Amara put her phone face down on the table. She looked at the kitchen ceiling. She thought about a hallway on the 32nd floor, 8 months ago, and a cloth bag of food she had set carefully on the floor. She thought about a ring in her coat pocket. She thought about an elevator descending and herself standing in it with her back straight and her face still, and everything cracked open inside her chest and nowhere private enough to put it yet. She had not known, that night, where she was going. She had not known, leaving that elevator and taking the subway home and sitting on her floor for an hour before calling Madison, that she was at the beginning of something rather than the end. She had thought she was just leaving. She had been doing something much harder than that. She had been starting over in a city that was not her home, in a career she had set aside, in a life that had been arranged around someone else's needs for so long that she had partially forgotten the shape of her own. The article was live. Her phone began to ring. The first call was from a design contact in Seoul she hadn't spoken to in a year. The second was from the client whose project she had declined because Preston had said he had business tensions with a connected party. The third was from a gallery owner she'd met briefly at a cultural event 18 months ago who said, very directly, that he had been following her renovation project coverage and wanted to discuss something. She answered all three. She made notes. She scheduled 2 follow-up calls for the following week. She told the gallery owner she would have time to discuss his project after her current contract concluded. She was on the phone when Madison appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in yesterday's clothes, hair sideways, holding her own phone. She had already read it. Amara could tell by the particular quality of her stillness. "It's everywhere," Madison said quietly. Amara covered her phone. "How everywhere?" "Financial news, 3 cultural publications. It's being shared." Madison looked at her screen. "Preston's PR firm has already issued a statement. It says the reporting is inaccurate and they're reviewing legal options." Amara went back to her call. She finished it. She hung up. "They always say that," she said. "It means they have nothing else." Madison put her phone on the table and sat down. "What happens now?" she said. Amara looked at her notes from the 3 calls. She looked at the harbor through the window. She looked at Madison, who had been present at every stage of the last several months, who had shown up with food and company and a recording she hadn't known she needed, who had run financial audit trails through her own professional time without being asked, who had sat on a couch in an apartment that wasn't hers and slept there because Amara had said she needed company. "What happens now," Amara said, "is that I go to the site and finish the building." Madison stared at her. "The 3rd floor lighting goes in today," Amara said. "The North Corridor installation was confirmed for 10 o'clock. I have a contractor meeting at 2. She picked up her coffee cup. "And then next week I start on the 4th floor, and when the building is done, it's going to be the best work I've done in 5 years. Madison looked at her for a long moment. Then she laughed. The loud, specific laugh that cut through rooms, the one Amara had found like water in a desert the first year in Busan. "You are insane," Madison said, with complete admiration. "I have work to do," Amara said. Her phone buzzed. A message from Minjai. She opened it. "The article is thorough. Vanessa Reed is good at her job. How are you?" She typed back. "At the kitchen table. Madison is here. I have a contractor meeting at 2. A pause. Then, "Good. I'll be at the site at 4 if that's acceptable." She looked at the message for a moment. "It's acceptable," she typed. She put the phone down. Outside, the harbor was going gray-gold in the morning light, the water moving the way it always moved, without urgency, without drama, the way things moved when they had been moving a long time and intended to keep moving regardless of what happened on the shores beside them. Preston Calloway walked into his attorney's office at 9:04 and sat down across from a man who had the expression of someone about to deliver information that would require structural adjustments to a life. And the room was very quiet, and Preston's hands, for the first time in a very long time, were not entirely steady. And in a building 2 blocks from the beachfront in Hyundai, on the 3rd floor, the recessed lighting fixtures were going in at exactly the color temperature Amara had specified. Cool and diffuse and honest, the kind of light that showed things as they were rather than as someone had decided they ought to appear. And the building, which had spent 30 years being itself under other people's visions, was finally beginning to look like what it had always been capable of becoming. Preston Calloway's statement lasted 4 minutes and 30 seconds. His PR firm had arranged it in the lobby of a Seoul hotel, neutral ground, controlled environment, the kind of setting designed to convey stability. He stood at a small podium with 2 attorneys flanking him at a careful distance and read from a prepared text in the measured cadence of a man who had been coached extensively in the last 18 hours on the specific performance of wrongful accusation. He used the words inaccurate and misleading 7 times. He used legal action 3 times. He said the reporting contained significant factual errors without specifying a single one, because his attorneys had already told him that specifying errors invited documentation of the opposite. He said that his professional reputation spoke for itself and that he looked forward to demonstrating the truth through appropriate channels. He did not take questions. The footage ran on 2 financial news channels by noon and was clipped and shared broadly by early afternoon. By the time Amara saw it, sitting in the site office at the Hyundai building, eating a late lunch she had mostly forgotten to finish, the clip had already been contextualized by Vanessa Reed's follow-up post, which contained one additional item that had not been in the morning article. A second recording. Not the one from the hallway. Something different. A phone recording, 9 months old, obtained through Elena Voss, who had kept it the way careful women kept things they weren't sure they'd need until they needed them. Preston's voice speaking to Elena in the specific tone he used for intimacy, describing Amara as a holding pattern, describing the relationship as convenient infrastructure while his real ambitions aligned themselves. "She's not going anywhere," he said, in the recording. "She doesn't have anywhere to go." Amara read the transcript Vanessa had published. She couldn't bring herself to listen to the audio, not in a site office surrounded by contractors, and sat with the specific sensation of having something confirmed that she had known without knowing she knew. She had been architecture to him. She had been load-bearing in a building he was constructing for himself. Invisible until the building was done and the structure could be removed. She finished her lunch. She went back to the 3rd floor. Preston's legal team made their first contact with Vanessa Reed's publication at 2:15 that afternoon. They demanded a retraction of specific claims and provided, in support of this demand, a set of documents that were, according to the forensic contact Vanessa had retained, constructed using the same digital reproduction artifacts as the fraudulent financial documents attached to Amara's name. Preston had attempted to forge counter-evidence. Vanessa Reed published a brief factual update noting the legal contact and the forensic assessment of the documents provided at 4:45 p.m. By 5 o'clock, 2 of Preston's 3 European client relationships had sent notices of contract suspension pending review of the situation. By 6, the consulting contract with Kang Enterprises' Import Logistics Division had been formally terminated, not by Min-jae personally, but through the organization's legal office, in language that was precise and offered no grounds for dispute. By 8 that evening, a journalist from a Singapore-based financial outlet had published a short piece noting the similarities between the current situation and a dispute 3 years prior involving a business partner who had quietly settled after a similar pattern of document irregularities. The Singapore partner, identified only by professional description, had declined to comment publicly. But the piece existed. The parallel existed. Preston's attorney called him at 8:30 and spoke for 11 minutes. Amara did not know what was said in that conversation, and she would not learn the specifics until much later, but she knew the shape of it, because she had learned enough about Preston Calloway over 3 years of close proximity to understand that he had always operated on the assumption that situations could be managed, and that the specific crisis of his life was that he had reached one that could not. She was at the site until 9:30, later than she'd planned, walking the completed third floor with a flashlight and her own eyes, checking the lighting installation against her specifications. The recessed fixtures were exactly right. The color temperature was what she had asked for. Cool, diffuse, even. And in the empty space of the third floor with the lights at low power and the city visible through the east windows, the concrete ceiling she had saved from the previous design firm's plans looked like what it was, something real and structural and worth keeping. She stood in the north corridor for a few minutes, alone, in the quiet. She thought about the last 8 months, not in sequence, not narratively, just in the way certain moments surfaced when you were standing somewhere quiet after something was over. The hallway on the 32nd floor, the elevator, her kitchen floor, Madison's laugh, the charity exhibition, the painting in the wrong light, a courtyard with a 200-year-old ginkgo tree, 47 pages of forensic documentation, a 9-month-old recording of her own life described as convenient infrastructure by a man she had made food for. She did not cry. She had done her crying in private, in small amounts, at intervals, the way she did most things that were too large to do all at once. She stood in the north corridor and looked at the light she had chosen and felt, underneath the exhaustion and the residual weight of the last several weeks, something that she recognized after a moment as the specific satisfaction of having done what she set out to do. Not perfectly. Not without cost. Not without the kind of help that humbled her. Madison's audit, Minjae's documentation, Vanessa's rigor, Elena's testimony, Bay's unexpected call. She had not done this alone, and she was honest enough with herself to know it. But she had directed it. She had seen the shape of the problem and moved toward it rather than away, and she had insisted on the version of resolution that required truth rather than power. And it had worked. Imperfectly, expensively, with the specific exhaustion of a fight that had asked more of her than she'd had available on most individual days. It had worked. She turned off the flashlight. She went home. Minjae had been at the site at 4, as he'd said. They had walked the third floor together, and she had shown him the lighting, and he had looked at it with the same quality of attention he brought to everything, fully present, genuinely registering what he was seeing, and said simply that it was exactly right. They had not discussed Preston, or the article, or the legal developments. She had made a decision, sometime that afternoon, that the day the story ran was not the day she wanted to process it with him. She had needed the day to be about the work, about the building and the light and the floor she had designed and the crew she had directed and the physical specific fact of having done something well. He had understood this without being told. She was not sure if she found that comforting or unnerving. He had left at 6. At the door of the site office, he had paused. "Are you going to be all right tonight?" he said. "Yes," she said. "I mean, actually," he said. She looked at him. "I mean, actually, too," she said. "I'm tired. I'm going to go home and sleep." He nodded. He looked like he wanted to say something else and was choosing not to, which she had come to understand was a specific form of respect rather than reticence. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," he agreed and left. She had meant it. She went home. She slept for 9 hours without waking, the deepest sleep she had managed in weeks, and woke at 7 to her phone showing 43 notifications she set aside without reading and the harbor light coming through the gap in her curtains, and she lay in the quiet of her apartment for a few minutes, before getting up and making coffee and beginning the work of the next thing. So, Preston Calloway left Seoul on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after the article ran. He did not leave publicly. He did not issue a statement. His professional online presence, which had been carefully maintained for years, went quiet. The PR firm that had arranged his hotel lobby statement ended its contract with him. His attorney's office sent formal correspondence to Vanessa Reed's publication and to Minjae's legal team, indicating that their client was engaged in an internal review of the allegations and that further communication would be channeled through legal representatives. The 2 clients who had suspended their contracts did not reinstate them. He went back to the United States, to the city he had come from, and he went quietly, the way people went when they had understood that staying was more costly than leaving. Amara did not know the specifics of his departure. She learned it from Madison, who had a contact in the Seoul business community who mentioned it in passing. She received this information over coffee on a Wednesday morning and sat with it for a moment. "How do you feel?" Madison said. Amara thought about it honestly. Like when you've been carrying something heavy for a long time, she said, and you put it down, and your arms feel strange because they don't have anything in them. She looked at her cup. Not relieved exactly, more like recalibrating. That's fair, Madison said. I don't want to celebrate, Amara said. I want to be very clear about that. What happened to him is the appropriate consequence of what he did. But I don't feel good about it. I feel finished with it. Those are different things. Madison nodded. She understood the distinction. Elena Voss sent me a message, Amara said. Madison looked up. She found my email through Vanessa. She said, Amara picked up her phone and read it because she didn't want to paraphrase it. I want you to know that I believed him. About you, about what your relationship was, about what kind of person you were. I was wrong, and I am sorry that my believing him was part of what kept you in a situation that cost you. I hope your life is going well. She put the phone down. And then she said she'd moved back to Copenhagen. Madison was quiet for a moment. What did you write back? She said. That I believed him too, Amara said. For a long time, and that I hoped she was okay. Did she reply? Not yet. Amara wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. Maybe she won't. That's fine too. They sat for a while in the comfortable silence of people who didn't need to fill everything. What about Minjae? Madison said eventually. Amara looked out the window at the waterfront. A fishing boat was moving slowly across the middle distance, unhurried, the kind of movement that had nothing to prove. That's the next conversation, she said. She went to him on a Thursday evening, not to the office, to the apartment he kept near the harbor. She had been there once before, briefly, to drop off documents during the week of the article, and she had noticed the space the way she noticed all spaces, the high ceilings, the dark wood floors, the window that faced the water and took up most of the west wall. A space that had been furnished with the specific restraint of someone who knew what they wanted and didn't feel the need to fill every available surface to prove it. He opened the door and looked at her and moved back to let her in without asking what she was there for, because they had both known this conversation was coming. She sat on the couch. He sat across from her. Preston is gone, she said. I know. I want to talk about what comes next, she said. For us. And I want to do it without either of us managing the conversation. All right, he said. She looked at him directly. He was, as he always was, completely present. No deflection, no performance. The specific quality of attention that she had found disarming at the beginning and now recognized as simply who he was. A man who looked at things without flinching. I need to say something that I haven't said yet, she said. Say it. What you did, not telling me about Elena. I understand it. I've understood it since you explained your reasoning. The fear of looking like another powerful man intervening in someone's life for his own benefit. She held his gaze. And I want you to know that I also understand it cost you something to tell me. That honesty in that situation was not easy or self-serving. He said nothing. He was listening. But I need you to understand something from my side, she said. When I was with Preston, the way he controlled my life was not dramatic. It was not obvious. It was small decisions, small adjustments, small accommodations that I made willingly, one at a time, because I trusted that he saw me and cared what happened to me. She paused. The reason I couldn't see what was happening for 3 years is because I trusted his judgment about what was good for me. I let someone else's assessment of my situation become my reality. Minjae's hands, resting on his knees, were still. When you decided not to tell me about Elena, she said, you made an assessment about what was good for me and acted on it without my input. The intention was different. The mechanism was the same. Yes, he said quietly. I'm not saying you're Preston, she said. I want to be clear about that. I'm saying that I need something specific from whoever I am close to now. I need to be the one who decides what I know, what I'm ready for, what I can handle. She kept her voice level and her eyes on his. I am not fragile. I am not a thing that needs to be protected from information about my own life. And I need the person I'm with to believe that. He looked at her for a long moment. I believe it, he said. I didn't act like it. And I understand that saying I believe it now is not the same as having demonstrated it when it mattered. No, she agreed. It's not. What would demonstrate it, he said. Going forward, what would I need to do? She appreciated that he asked. She appreciated that he hadn't tried to preemptively answer the question himself. "Tell me things," she said. "When you know something that affects me or affects this, tell me. Not after you've decided it's the right time. Not after you've assessed whether I can handle it. When you know it." She paused. "And if you're ever in a situation where you're tempted to protect me by keeping something back, tell me you're tempted. Tell me what you know and that you weren't sure whether to say it. Give me the decision." He absorbed this. "That's a significant amount of trust," he said, "to extend to me now." "Yes," she said, "it is. And you're extending it anyway." "I'm telling you the terms," she said. "Whether we proceed on those terms is still a decision we're both making." He looked at her with the same intensity he had brought to every moment of any consequence between them. The gallery, the building site, the Hanok courtyard, the office with its pressure and its difficult honesty. He looked at her like she was the thing in the room that required the most careful attention, not because she was fragile, but because she was worth it. "I want to proceed," he said. "So do I," she said. She let that settle for a moment. Then something released in her chest, not dramatically, not in any way that announced itself. Just a quiet giving way, the specific physical sensation of deciding to trust something with both feet rather than one. "There's something I want to show you," he said. He stood. "If you'll come." He drove them out of the city center south along the coast, and then inland slightly, on roads that became narrower and less lit as the city gave way to the particular darkness of hills at night. She didn't ask where they were going. She looked out the window and watched the city fall away and the landscape become itself without the overlay of buildings and light. And she felt the tiredness in her body, the accumulated weeks of it, beginning to decompress slightly, the way a compressed thing slowly returns to its original volume when the pressure is released. He parked on a gravel drive she recognized in the dark. The Hanok compound. He had bought it, she knew. The paperwork had gone through 2 weeks earlier. She had signed off on a preliminary design assessment as part of the purchase documentation, at his request, as a professional opinion. She had not been back since the afternoon in the courtyard with the ginkgo tree. He had a key. He opened the main gate, and they walked through to the inner courtyard. It was cold, deep winter now, the kind of cold that was honest about itself. And the ginkgo tree had lost its leaves, standing in the courtyard with its enormous bare branches holding the dark sky like a structure, like something that had grown into its own architecture. The moon was present and partial, and in its light the courtyard had a quality that was neither beautiful nor austere, but both at the same time, the way real things were. She stood looking at the tree. "When do you want to start?" she said. "Spring," he said. "When the ground is workable." "That's good timing," she said. "It'll give me time to research the period accurately. I want to do this right, not a restoration that's actually a reconstruction. The real thing, as much as possible." "I know," he said. "That's why I'm asking you." She looked at the tree. It was enormous up close. The trunk at least 6 feet in diameter, bark deeply furrowed in the way of things that had grown through a long time and multiple seasons of difficulty. It had been here before the compound was built. It would be here after whatever they did to the compound was finished. "It's a good tree," she said. "Yes," he said. They stood in the cold for a while, not speaking, not needing to. The moon moved slightly, and the quality of the light on the courtyard stones shifted, and the tree's shadow changed its angle by a few degrees. The slow, specific movement of things that measured time in seasons rather than minutes. "I want to ask you something," she said. "Ask." "The painting," she said. "At the gallery. You bought it." A pause. "Yes." "Where is it?" He looked at her. Then he turned and walked toward the main hall of the compound, and she followed him through the low doorway into the interior space, dusty, empty, smelling of old wood and time. And he turned on a small handheld light and directed it toward the far wall. The painting was there, leaning against the wall, still unframed, wrapped in a cloth that he partially moved so she could see it. The Korean landscape, the autumn mountain, the inkwork that needed the right light to show itself properly. She crouched in front of it. In the low ambient light from the courtyard and the handheld lamp, the painting was different from how it had looked under the gallery's harsh gold spots. The inkwork breathed. The gradations in the mountain shadow read as what they were. 3 separate layers applied at 3 different times. The kind of technique that required patience and knowledge and an understanding that the work was not finished when it looked finished, but when it was genuinely complete. She looked at it for a long time. "You never displayed it," she said. "No." "Why?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because I bought it knowing exactly what was wrong with where it had been placed, and I couldn't fix that immediately. I needed the right space." He paused. "I was waiting." She looked at him over her shoulder. "For this?" she said. "For somewhere it could be what it actually was," he said. "Not performed, not managed, just itself." She straightened up and looked at the painting and then at the room. The old timber frames, the dimensions of the space, the direction the light would come from in the right season at the right time of day. "North wall," she said. "When the restoration is done, with the right window alignment, this room could have beautiful morning light if we address the orientation of the east opening. Northern diffused light in the afternoon." She looked at the painting. "That's what it needs." "I know," he said. She turned around and looked at him in the dim light of the old room, and she had the plain, unguarded thought, that she was looking at a man who had made mistakes and told her about them without being asked to, and who had listened when she spoke about what she needed, and who had bought a painting because he understood what it meant to see something clearly when no one else had bothered. She was also aware that none of this made him simple, that he was complex and capable of things she would never fully see, and that his world had dimensions that existed outside the part she inhabited. She was aware of all of it. She was choosing to stand in the courtyard with the old tree and the cold and the painting that needed the right light anyway. Not despite the complexity. Not by deciding the complexity didn't exist. Because she was 31 years old and she had spent enough time arranging herself around other people's visions of what she ought to be, and she was not doing that again. And this, standing in a place she had chosen with her eyes open, next to a person she had chosen with full knowledge of what she was choosing, felt nothing like any of the compromises she had made before. "Spring," she said. "Spring," he confirmed. She looked at the painting one more time, then she walked back out into the courtyard, into the cold and the moonlight and the company of the enormous old tree, and she stood with her coat pulled close and her face turned up slightly toward the open sky, and behind her she could hear Minjay following her out, his footsteps on the old courtyard stones, and she felt the specific aliveness of standing in a place she was genuinely present in, not performing, not accommodating, not making herself smaller, just there. The building in Hyundai was completed in late February. It was, by every assessment that mattered to her, exactly what she had set out to make it. The concrete ceiling on floors 2 through 4 had been restored and made the centerpiece it deserved to be. The lighting throughout was cool and honest and adjustable, calibrated to show the space as it actually was, rather than as someone had decided it should appear. The north corridor on the 3rd floor had the recessed fixtures she had specified, and in the morning light they created exactly the quality of illumination she had been working toward. Even, clean, without drama, the kind of light that made everything in the space look like itself. She walked the building one final time alone on the morning of the handover. She went floor by floor slowly, taking in everything, the things that had gone exactly as planned and the things that had required adjustment and the things she would do differently on the next project, all of it registered and stored. On the 4th floor, at the east window, she stopped and looked out at Hyundai Beach. The winter sea was gray-green and clean-edged, and the morning was cold and clear, the kind of morning that made the city look like it had been rinsed. She had a phone call at noon with the gallery owner who had reached out the morning the article ran. His project was a conversion, a former industrial warehouse on the east side of the city, earmarked for a mixed-use cultural space with exhibition rooms and a performance area. It was the largest project she had ever been offered the lead on. It would take at least 18 months. She had been preparing her preliminary proposal for 2 weeks. She would not set it aside for anything. She looked at the beach for another moment. Then she turned and walked back through the building, through the lobby, and out the front entrance, into the cold morning, and she did not look back. Madison's birthday was in early March. Amara took her to a restaurant near the waterfront. Not expensive in the performing way, just genuinely good, the kind of place where the food required attention, and the room didn't try to make you feel like you were somewhere you weren't. They ate for 3 hours and talked about everything and nothing in the specific rhythm of people who were comfortable enough with each other that silence and conversation occupied the same continuous space. At some point, over dessert, Madison said, "You look different." "Different how?" "Like you're taking up more room," Madison said. "Not physically, just in how you're sitting, how you're talking." She looked at her plate. "Like you stopped waiting to see if you were allowed to be here." Amara thought about that. "I think I did stop," she said. "When?" She wasn't sure of the exact moment. It hadn't been a single thing. It had been the accumulation of small decisions, taking the renovation contract, calling Vanessa Reed, sitting on Min Jae's office floor with the cold tile under her hands, and choosing to go forward instead of retreat. The recording, the article, the North Corridor lighting, Hanoke courtyard in the cold. "Incrementally," she said, "the same way I got smaller, just in the opposite direction." Madison looked at her for a moment with the expression she sometimes had when she was saying something important and had decided to say it simply. "I want you to know," Madison said, "that watching you do this year has been, I don't have a word for it, watching you decide to take up space again." She looked at her glass. "I've known you since you got here, and I watched you get smaller for 3 years, and I didn't know how to stop it. And it made me angrier than I could say." "I know," Amara said quietly. "And then you just—" Madison stopped. "You left. You came home. You sat on your floor and called me, and then you got up the next morning and went back to return the ring. And I thought, okay, there she is. There's Amara." Amara looked at the table. "She was always there," she said. "She just needed to remember she was allowed to be." They stayed until the restaurant was nearly empty, the way you stayed in places when you were not ready for the evening to end, when the conversation still had room in it. On a Saturday in late March, when the spring was beginning its tentative arrival in Busan, that specific stage where the cold relented enough to make outdoor light look different, warmer at the edges, suggesting what was coming. Amara went to the Hanok compound with a notebook and a camera and 4 hours set aside for a proper site assessment. Min Jae was there when she arrived. He had said he would be, and he was, standing in the outer courtyard with coffee and 2 cups, which she accepted without comment. They walked the compound together. She took measurements and photographs and made notes and asked him questions about what he wanted the spaces to become, and he answered with the directness she had come to know. Clear about what he wanted, clear about what he didn't know, clear about where her expertise was better than his instinct. In the inner courtyard, the ginkgo tree was beginning to show the first signs of spring. Barely, just the swelling of buds along the tips of the uppermost branches, the smallest possible indication of what was coming. She stood looking at it for a moment. "I want to design the main hall around the morning light," she said. "There's an alignment possible. If we adjust the east opening and remove the incorrect ceiling modification, where the spring and autumn morning light will come through and hit the north wall at exactly the angle that works for the painting." "Show me," he said. She showed him, standing in the hall, indicating with her hands the line of the light, the angle of incidence, the way the space would need to be oriented. He watched and understood, the way he always understood things she showed him. "Yes," he said, "do that." She put the notebook away. She looked at the courtyard through the hall's open door. The tree, the stones, the specific quality of late morning light on an early spring day in a place that had been waiting a long time to be properly inhabited. She thought about a hallway on the 32nd floor, and a cloth bag, and a ring in a coat pocket, and all the distance between that night and this morning. The distance that was not only time, but the specific interior distance of a person who had walked back toward themselves from a long way away. She was a designer. She understood spaces, what they were, what they wanted to become, what happened when you put the wrong thing in the wrong environment and called the result a failure, when the failure had never been the thing itself. She understood the painting. She had always understood the painting. She turned to Min Jae. He was watching her with that specific quality of attention, full, unhurried, asking nothing she hadn't offered. "I want to start in April," she said. "April is good," he said. She nodded. She looked back at the tree. The buds were there, barely visible, just beginning, the quiet, specific start of something that had been gathering through the cold for months, and was now, in the right light, at the right time, finally ready to show what it had always been capable of becoming. She reached out and took the second cup of coffee. She had been holding her own empty cup for 10 minutes. And she stood in the courtyard of the Hanok compound in the early spring light, and she was not waiting for permission, and she was not making herself smaller, and she was not arranging herself around someone else's vision of what she ought to be. She was simply there, present, unhurried, taking up exactly the space she occupied. And for the first time in a very long time, that was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.